The House preparing to debate a bill tomorrow that would authorize new sanctions against North Korea by the United States. This, as President Trump says, he is preparing for the worst when it comes to dealing with the so-called hermit kingdom. Joining us now to weigh in on all of this is Forbes columnist Gordon Chang. Gordon, thank you very much for being here. I think it was interesting that President Trump in an interview saying that, look, he would meet with Kim Jong-un if the circumstances were right. Do you think that could ever happen?
Well, anything is possible, especially with President Trump, who really is intent on breaking convention and willing to do things that need to be done. Also, we've got to remember that the United States has got its back to the wall. Within 4 years, the North Koreans will be able to mate a nuke to a long-range ballistic missile and hit the lower 48 states. So, you know, right now, almost anything can happen because we're at a point where we haven't ever been before.
They're talking about sanctions. I think a lot of people will think, well, surely we have very strong sanctions already on North Korea. Is that true? And is China following through on its role in those sanctions?
Yeah. Well, the sanctions on the paper are not nearly as stiff as, for instance, the sanctions that were imposed on Iran. Also, those sanctions are not being enforced by China. China has been blatantly ignoring its obligations. Also, the other sanctions that we really need to talk about are those on Chinese banks and enterprises that have been supporting the ballistic missile program of North Korea, and also North Korea's nuclear weapons program. They've been selling semi-processed fissile material, all sorts of components for nukes. And the United States has known about this for decades, and we haven't done anything about it. And also, some Chinese banks have been involved in some illicit commerce of North Korea. You know, for instance, the theft of $81 million from the Central Bank of Bangladesh at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Well, that probably was facilitated by Chinese banks because federal prosecutors think Chinese middlemen actually orchestrated that. So if Chinese middlemen were there, so were Chinese banks.
Is Kim Jong-un rational enough to negotiate with?
Well, he is rational, but right now there's so much turmoil, I think, in Pyongyang. We started to see that at the end of January. So he's not really in a position to deal in good faith with China, the United States, or the international community. So now's not the time to be talking to him directly. Now's the time to actually coerce him. Make him, get him to the point.
Back him into a corner a little bit?
Back him to a corner where he realizes he has no choice but to give up his nukes and his long-range missiles. If we can do that, then we talk to him, because then we can have a negotiated settlement. But until then, talking to him is really not going to do any good.
Wanted to get your feedback on this very quickly. President Trump facing some growing backlash over a White House invitation to Rodrigo Duterte. He's the controversial president of the Philippines. Duterte has come under fire. As we know, we've been following this, his bloody war on the drug scene and possible violation of human rights. Is there any advantage gained by having this individual come to the White House?
Well, not
with regard to the region. Is there any influence that this person may hold?
Well, with regard to the region, yes. I mean, this has been sold as part of coalition building for North Korea. Philippines has really very little impact on the resolution of North Korea, but it does have a critical role with the South China Sea because it blocks, for instance, the Chinese Navy and the Air Force from surging into the Western Pacific, where we don't want them to be. Philippines is a treaty ally, and yes, Duterte has been involved in this state-sanctioned murder of 8,000 drug dealers and drug addicts. I mean, it's really horrific. But, you know, we already had the Chinese president in Mar-a-Lago, and there are state-sanctioned killings in China, and we don't raise the subject with regard to Beijing. So, you know, we need to have some consistency here.
All right, we'll leave it right there. Gordon, thank you very much. Appreciate it.